All right, it's just gone 10 o'clock, so I'll officially open the fifth meeting for the Fraser Coast Regional Council meeting for 2019 here at Teebar. We have no, sorry, Stefan Sluky's not here yet. So move on to the second item of the agenda, apologies. And I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet here and pay my respects to their elders past and present. The only apology is Councillor Light, and who's on leave. Disclosures of interest. We'll now spend the next hour on disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? Yeah. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have three declarations to make. All are really in an...
Hang on a sec.
Would it be appropriate to deal with each one?
Yeah. So
Yes.
just so we got to do this rather methodically, because you can't vote on somebody else's potential disclosure if you're going to be disclosing. So perhaps we'll just move through the agenda, and people can just raise their hands if they got to discuss, and if I miss any. So yeah, item 10.2.1. I don't think there's any disclosures of interest on that. Item 10.2.2, yep. Okay, so everybody who's going to make a disclosure of interest on this can't vote on anyone else's. So we'll start off. So should we just go around the room? So you want to give your one, yep?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yep, so I'll be quick. In relation to this item, I'll declare that, as noted, religious entities are included as part of the policy. I attend Maryborough City Church and also am a member of the board of this church. I've also been asked to remain a patron of Granville Football Club. I don't believe they're part of this policy, but currently in the process of declining this invitation for the 2019 year, though for transparency purposes, and until I formally decline, I'll declare this as part of the policy in case they're included. And how I'll deal with this is I'll be leaving the room for this item. Also, as I have a sibling that plays for Sunbury Football Club, which train at a ground, who are part of this policy change as well. So, and our daughter does as well. So there's no benefit to them whatsoever. But as noted, I'll leave the room for this item just in case, for transparency and conflict purposes. So that's right. I'll be dealing it by leaving the room. That's right.
Can I just check how many people are going to disclose an interest on this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll have 5 people left.
With my question at the briefing the other day, that I thought we might run into this issue.
Yeah, so sorry, I should explain what the issue is. No, if somebody is declaring a conflict of interest, or perceived or real, on a specific item, they can't vote on the other members' conflicts, which means 5 of us can't vote on it when there'd only be 5 left and the quorum is 6. So that's the issue.
May I raise a point of order, Mr. Mayor? It would seem to me, and this may be what you and the CEO are discussing at the moment, that that item may be covered under ordinary business matter where there's an exemption, and I can see 2 possibilities. In the definition of ordinary business matter, paragraph D, the making or levying of rates and charges or the fixing of a cost recovery fee by the local government. Now, it seems to me that this is part of the making or levying of a rate or charge because it's providing a concession on it. Alternatively, G6, a matter that is of interest to a person merely as a member of a non-profit, charitable or religious organisation involving no personal financial gain or loss to the person. It would seem to me that the concerns, and perhaps we ought to note the people who raised them just for the record, but it would seem to me that all of these concerns preempting what they may say, come under ordinary business matter and therefore don't form part of the personal interest issues where that whole process of voting on it would commence.
That's right. So it's all a matter of whether or not we have to say it's received or not, and then it's not because
So I agree entirely with Councillor Lewis that I believe it's captured by the definition of ordinary business matter, and in particular those sections of the legislation that David quoted. So to err on the side of caution, I think it would be appropriate for a councillor to perhaps move a motion noting that some councillors have members but non-executive members of the charitable or not-for-profit associations listed in the agenda, and that in accordance with the Local Government Act, in particular the definition of ordinary business matter and its section section D. What's the section? Subsection?
Well, the ordinary business matter is defined in the dictionary.
Yeah, Schedule 4. I'm not sure what section it is. Yeah, so Section 4, definition of ordinary business matter, subsection D, and also subsection G6, and that the council resolve that the matter is firstly an ordinary business matter, and secondly that councillors, merely because of their membership of non-executive membership of the organisation, are not deemed to have a conflict of interest. Non-executive. So if you have an executive, you perhaps have a perceived conflict of interest, and you declare a perceived conflict of interest.
So of the 5 people who were wishing to declare, who is in a non-executive position?
I haven't even bothered John Doonville is here.
Okay, right, so that solves that problem then. Because I'm in the same boat as you guys, I'm a member of the church. I make no bones
Mr
about
Mayor,
it.
I'd actually like to move a motion that this council handle that under the section that David wrote in Schedule 4. And I'd like to move a motion that that's how we handle this motion.
Yeah, so as sort of came out.
As can,
So if I can paraphrase your motion, that the council deems that this matter is the council resolves that this matter is considered an ordinary business matter in accordance with Section 4 of the Local Government Act, in particular the definition of ordinary business matter and subsections D and G6 of the schedule, and further resolves that non-executive members of religious, charitable and not-for-profit organisations do not have a conflict of interest.
can I ask a question? In relation to that, my question would be, for those who will be still declaring a perceived conflict, how does that restrict them from firstly participating in that vote, and secondly, when they do declare a perceived conflict and remain in the room, how does it then translate that all the others who have also identified that perceived conflict would be able to vote on that?
So my expectation would be that those that have executive positions not participate in the vote, and then after the passing of that resolution, those that have executive positions of a religious, charitable or not-for-profit organisation would declare a perceived conflict of interest, and the remainder of the council would vote on that matter.
So an ordinary member wouldn't declare perceived conflicts.
Yeah. So Councillor Sanderson wouldn't and shouldn't have to. Yeah, and
You were an executive member of the church though, aren't you? I'm only on the board. Yeah, that's an executive position. Yeah, but that's still an executive. So I'm happy to move that. Second, sorry. Dennis is...
Just have another point of information, if I may. I mean, in that recitation of the motion at the very beginning, it should have referred to Schedule 4, not Section 4. Schedule 4 being the definition. The other relevant paragraphs are all relevant sections of the Act are 175 capital D and 175 capital E. 175 capital D defines conflict of interest, and that's where it refers to being, a member of a group without being on the board. But 175E says, and that deals with the obligation to disclose the conflict of interest. 175E says this section applies if a matter is to be discussed and B, the matter is not an ordinary business matter. So if the matter is an ordinary business matter, it doesn't reach the threshold for disclosure. And so my point simply is that because of the definition of ordinary business matter in Schedule 4, whether you're on the executive or whether you're simply a member, it doesn't matter. It's going to be an ordinary business matter, and you'll have an exemption there. That seems to me to be the position, which would mean that you'd simply need a resolution confirming that the meeting takes the position that this is an ordinary business matter and that the obligation for disclosure does not apply.
My concern with that, and without rehashing old ground, is we have a councillor here who voted on an ordinary business matter, believing that it was an ordinary business matter, fees and charges, and had to apologise to this chamber for not declaring a conflict of interest. So while the legislation is clear, perhaps some of the advice we received from the independent assessor on these things is somewhat different to the application, as I would reasonably see your assessment of it. I'm not sure in practical terms that actually translates.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just comment that I agree. Again, I agree with Councillor Lewis, but I believe to err on the side of caution, because we have seen different interpretations, and I think there is a distinction between an ordinary member and executive member. So my advice would be, whilst I agree with Councillor Lewis, to ensure that we err on the side of caution, that where you hold an executive position, you declare a potential conflict or perceived conflict of interest and allow the council to vote on it.
I agree with that. I think when you're holding an executive, you have a duty to that body, and you have a duty here. There is a conflict of interest if you're on the executive of another body.
So via the Mayor to the CEO. So with this motion that Councillor Chapman's putting forward, will Councillor Sanderson and myself be able to vote on that, because we are the people who will be declaring? So we don't vote on this first one, and then, or Councillor Taylor. Thank you.
Okay.
So just for clarity, because this is a motion, as opposed to voting on a perceived conflict, our non-voting will be in the negative, so we'll have to leave the room for the vote.
I'll just go on a bathroom break now.
Sorry?
You just go on a bathroom break. Okay. We'll do that first. Okay, so before I move the motion, which has been moved and seconded, no, yeah. Well, I think at any point somebody can declare an interest. They've got to be able to. Yeah.
Yeah, so just finishing, I will...
He's leaving the...
No, we're going to declare the interest first and then...
Let those who are executives walk out of the room and you vote on this, and then we can move on. Because you've already got it on the table, or you're going to have to withdraw it.
I think as a matter of sort of practice, anybody at any point should be able to declare an interest, you know, if you... Yeah, like even if it's at the very last minute.
So we've received, for the motions on the table, we now have it hasn't been spoken to, the speaker hasn't spoken to it. We're now having councillors declare conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
So in relation to this motion, I would like to declare a perceived conflict of interest on item 10.2.2. I am the president of the Harvey Bay Surf Lifesaving Club, who is one of the organisations that may benefit from the adoption of this policy. This is a perceived conflict of interest, as there is no personal benefit to me. So I will not be able to vote in this, yes? On this matter, yep.
So you need to make a resolution.
Yep.
So you've got it there?
Yeah,
Do you want to show it to me?
Yep.
He's on the executive. Yeah, so you're actually leaving the room, so there's no vote. Yeah. So Councillor Everett has indicated he's leaving the room for this motion and the later one. Councillor
That's
Sanderson?
right, Mr Mayor. I'll be leaving the room as well for this one. And I've just spoken to Councillor Truscott as well. I don't think I need to advise it, but I'm also on the Aldridge State High School. They're not part of this, on their committee as a council rep, but I'm just saying that for transparency purposes. Yep.
All right, so Councillor Everett, because he's on the board of the Harbour Bay Surf Life Saving Club, and you're on the board of a church, are leaving the room. Yep. Councillor Truscott?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just for clarity, when I first went to raise it, so I don't know, because I'm not on the executive and I was going to make a perceived conflict, do I still need to declare that one, or it comes under ordinary business? I don't need to. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further declaration?
Yes.
Yep.
It's in relation to obviously item 10.2.2. I am director on an executive position of Football Queensland Wide Bay, who does not hold any lease or any land, but they have member clubs who do, and have an association with obviously Football Harvey Bay, not as a member but just as an administrative arm. On that basis, I believe I have a perceived conflict, but I do not believe that conflict will prohibit me from making a rational and reasonable decision on this matter, and I'll be seeking to, while I have a perceived conflict, to remain in the room. Yeah.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear, you're on the executive of an organisation that doesn't have any leases or pay any rates or water to council. Yep. I move that Councillor Taylor may participate, discuss and vote on agenda item. That Councillor Taylor has a perceived conflict of interest in relation to item 10.2.2, and that Councillor Taylor may participate, discuss and vote on agenda item 10.2.2, notwithstanding that there is a perceived conflict of interest. Oh yeah, is there a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe? Are there any speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. There must be 7 of us. 7. Was it? Up again, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, okay, that's carried 7, unanimous. Okay, any more before we go to the actual motion? Okay. Okay, and sorry, and I'll just say, Reverend Slucky, obviously we need some guidance, so I'll call upon you, once we've dealt with this one, we'll call upon you for the prayer. Yeah.
Can I vote on this, or because I've declared a perceived conflict which is voted on?
Yeah, we passed a resolution.
No, this is Dennis's one. Yeah. This is Dennis's motion, not the actual 10.2.2.
Yeah, we just declared that he will participate.
In item 10.2.2.
There's got a conflict, but is that?
Yeah, I think so. It's the source motion. This is a...
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a motion now moved by Councillor Chapman, seconded by Councillor Maddern. Did you wish to speak to this, Councillor Chapman? No. Yeah.
I think it's been spoken.
Okay. Any speakers? Everyone understands what the motion is? If not, okay. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8. That'll be 8 with them too. Yeah. It's carried 8. Unanimous. Okay, and we'll time how long this takes, because I'm going to write to the minister. And, yeah. I'm going to, this is... Okay, sorry, Reverend Slucky, if you could lead us in prayer, and then we'll go back to the disclosures.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Mayor George and councillors. It's a sense of how young I feel because, you know, it's only older people who turn up early for meetings. And Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be with you today. And I wish you well for your meeting. And I would have loved to have stayed. We planned to stay, but I do have another commitment in town that I have to be at before midday, so we need to make our way back. Let us pray. Lord our God, as council meets here in this beautiful part of the country as described to me, the psalmist said, "Let all the ends of the earth praise you." Thank you for the reminder as we meet in this beautiful setting, undisturbed by the noise of traffic and the commotion that happens even in our beautiful city of Maryborough and also over the bay when we meet there, that you are Lord of and remember those who dwell in the most isolated places. And so we pray that your face would shine upon our meeting today, and the most mundane and ordinary of matters of business too. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the rains that have fallen recently to green up and bless the soil. And we pray your blessing upon us and guide us with your wisdom, grace and effectiveness as we meet today. And I ask these prayers in Jesus' name. Amen. Blessings. Thank you.
Okay, so we've dealt with item 10.2.2. 10.2.3, no. 10.2.4, no. 10.2.9. Let me know if I've missed one that you have a conflict on. Yes.
Mr Mayor, in relation to the lease for the Football Harvey Bay, item 10.2.9, I am a director of Football Queensland Wide Bay, which has an affiliate relationship with Football Harvey Bay. Because this is a lease before council, because it is a significant benefit to Football Harvey Bay, it could be reasonably assumed that I'd have a real conflict, and for that reason I will not be voting on the matter, and I will leave the room for discussions and the vote.
Thank you. So there's no need for a vote on that. Is there anyone else on 10.2.9? 10.2.10? 10.3.1? 10.3.2? 11.1? Yeah. Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So for item 11.1, the Anzac Park walking track lighting. The Integrity Commissioner has advised that I declare a personal interest in the matter, not a conflict or a perceived conflict, but a personal interest in that I regularly participate in and volunteer for Parkrun, which uses part of this walking track on Saturday mornings at 7 a.m, but does not have exclusive use, and this motion is suggesting for lighting of the park, which is at night when Parkrun does not operate. So I don't believe I have a conflict of interest in this and would intend to stay in the room and vote on the matter.
Mm-hmm. I move that Councillor Truscott does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting while item 11.1 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Yeah, so Daniel won't vote on this. Councillor Lewis, yeah. Yeah, is there a seconder for that? Councillor O'Keefe? So neither of you two. Is nobody else on this one? No, it shouldn't be anyone. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-0. Councillor Sanderson, do you have on the same one?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Yep, same one. Same part of Parkrun, Maryborough, which is a park on a Saturday morning, not at Saturday on night time at all. So I'll declare that I determine this personal interest isn't of sufficient significance, and I'll be dealing with this by staying in the room and voting on the matter, and will ask my colleagues to determine that.
Mm-hmm. I move that Councillor Sanderson does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting while agenda item 11.1 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hanson. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-0. Item 11.2, is there any disclosures? 11.3, 11.4, 15.1, 15.2.
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. That's a personal joke. 15.2, I will declare a conflict in relation to Fraser Coast Sports and Recreation Precinct. It relates to a sponsorship for OzTag in the Queensland Touch State event sponsorship. I have no relationship with either of these parties, but once again I am a director on Football Queensland Wide Bay, which will receive a benefit of some sort by access to those fields because they were brought on sooner, is my understanding. For that purpose, I believe it's a perceived conflict, and I will be removing myself from the room and I will not be voting on the matter.
Okay, thank you. The next item, should we get up to? Yeah, 15.3, 15.4. Yep, Councillor Sanderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I'll declare that I have a perceived conflict in relation to this item. I have a sibling whose son has just started playing squirts, which is like 3 or 4 years old, for a club that is an applicant of this grant. I haven't played numerous years. Also have another sibling who plays for another local club, which sometimes play at these fields. So, as said, there's no benefit to anyone in relation to this item, but I'll declare this and deal with this by staying in the room if my colleagues allow me to do that.
So what did you fill in a form for this one? Okay, do you want to hand it up? Were there anyone else for this item? Yeah, there's one for Football Harvey Bay in there.
Yes, and Doom Villa, which are both member or affiliate associations. I did not fill out a form because I didn't. Can I say that? Can I mention those names because it's a confidential matter? Yeah. So I retract what I just said. It is perceived conflict, and I do apologise for not filling out the form. It's similar to the one previously, and I believe it's a perceived conflict, and I will be removing myself from the room, and I will not be voting on the matter.
Yeah. Before we do that, I just want to make sure that nobody votes on it that shouldn't vote. Is there anyone else on this item? Okay. Given that I'll vote. I move that that Councillor Sanderson does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in item 15.4 while is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Is there a seconder? Councillor Maddern. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-0. The next item is item 15.5, community grants. Yeah. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for 15.5 for round 2 of the community grants. This one also under the advice of the Integrity Commissioner that I have a personal interest, again not a real or perceived conflict of interest, in that my mother, Jane Truscott, is a volunteer for one of the organisations that I have advised my colleagues of in our briefing meeting, and I've written that on the form for the declaration. But yes, she holds no position on the board and is not able to make decisions for the charity. So I have no conflict there. It's just a personal interest, and I intend to stay in the room and vote on the matter.
Yeah. I move that Councillor Truscott does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting while agenda item 15.5 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Is there a seconder? Councillor Chapman. There was nobody else on this one, was there? Yeah, other than you two. Yeah. Okay. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-0.
Yeah. So,
Oh yeah. Okay.
yep, same one, Mr. Mayor. I've declared that it's a personal interest as well, similar to Councillor Truscott. My parents also used to volunteer for an organisation that are part of this grant. They were there for many years, haven't done so for numerous years now though. So as to declaring a personal interest, the way I'll be dealing with it, because I don't think it's of no significance at all, but I'll raise for transparency, and I'll be dealing with this by staying in the room.
Mm-hmm. I move that Councillor Sanderson does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting while agenda item 15.5 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-0. All right, so we had one supplementary item, Shelcott Street. Any conflicts? No. So did I miss anyone? Did anyone have a disclosure of interest? No? That I didn't pick up on? Yeah. Okay, thank you for your patience. The next item is item 5.1, or the minutes of the last meeting. Okay, page 5. You moving it, Councillor Everard. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mattern. Are there any speakers to this? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? I'll abstain.
No, you can't move the resolution. You can second, you can vote, but you can't move it.
You can. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is public participation report from the CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Caught me off guard with all those resolutions. We had 4 people participate in public participation today. The first one was Ms. Gail Gold. She raised concern about the incorrect naming of Sandy Creek as Munna Creek and requested that signage be changed. We also heard from a Mr. Graham Wode, who requested council to consider updating the disaster dashboard by including the BOM flood warning system and the Mary River flood classification system. We heard from Tina Greenhow. She submitted 9 issues by correspondence, but raised 2, namely she requested the council to look into RV and day visitor tourism and the need for toilets at Brewina, and she also asked the council to consider emergency signage for flooding between creeks. Miss Barbara Logan presented to the council today. She raised concerns about the condition of Burbajan Road, I had it right before, Burbajan Road, and the impact of vehicles, and requested it be sealed progressively over a number of years. We also heard from a Robin Johnson, who requested to speak privately to councillors. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we'll move on to, do we have to, okay, is there a mover that the CEO's report be accepted? Councillor Truscott, seconded Councillor Lewis. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item, there's no deputations. Are there any petitions to be presented? No? No? Yep. Officers' reports, item 10.1.1, the open resolution register on page 21. Are there any questions for the officers on this? Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question to Director Carline. Just to check on page 53, I read the status update there, and that's good to see about the item ordinary 11.1 from January of this year about Greener Fraser Coast, the planting of 100,000 trees. I just thought I'd see if we could ask for a verbal update on that, and if there is anything about particularly identifying the areas which might be looked at for that as part of the resolution there?
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you, Councillor Truscott, for the question. So we haven't got into the significant detail around the locations, but the items which are mentioned in the report, we had our executive manager out meeting 2 weeks ago with his colleagues in the Toowoomba Regional Council. They're noted as one of the leaders in terms of urban greening across Queensland. So, and they have a lot of resources, which we may be able to co-op. So we had a look at. They've done a lot of work around species selection, around how trees work together. A lot of work around. Pods and things like that to get trees to coexist with water and sewer infrastructure and road infrastructure. So we're doing all of that background work to make sure that we can plant in the most appropriate locations and that we give the trees the best opportunities in the urban environment, as well as the broader scale opportunities for large scale planting in more open areas. But we're really keen to use this process that Council's asked us to do to really brighten up our streetscapes and make sure that a decent proportion of those that tree planting goes into the urban environments where it's going to have a real positive effect on urban heat and issues like that. We've also, as mentioned there, we've had lots of discussion with the company that runs Cool Streets, done a lot of work in places like Adelaide and Melbourne around heavily urbanised environments and how you can use trees to create shade, helps with property value increase and things like that as well. So lots of background work going on right across the project, and looking forward to presenting all that to Council once it's all compiled.
Mr Mayor, may I just ask a further question? So is there any consideration being given to tree planting or vegetation management in terms of erosion, coastal hazard?
Yeah, through you again, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Madden. Yes, definitely. So, particularly through the CHAS project. So we've got a number of projects in this space. So the CHAS project, which we're at stage 3 at the moment, is going to have a good look at that. We're looking at our community engagement and how we can do that well over the next 18 months as we do that project, and talking to all of particularly the outlying communities about what we do on their beaches, how we can try and protect those, as well as the team are looking quite closely at succession planting, because what we have at a lot of our coastal areas is we've lost trees because of either storm events or just because of age, and what we haven't done particularly well in the past is that succession planting and making sure that we're out in advance of trees dying off and making sure that we have the replacement canopy coming up. So we're looking at that very closely.
Any further questions on this report? If not, is there a mover for it? Councillor Truscott, seconded Councillor Maddern. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.1 on page 55, notification of appointment of position of Deputy Mayor. Did you want to quickly explain the...
Yeah, so thank you, Mr Mayor. So this doesn't require a decision of Council today to appoint a Deputy Mayor. It's simply to comply with the local government legislation where it requires us to notify our intent to appoint a Deputy Mayor in advance of doing so. And the intention is that we declare at the meeting to be held on the 26th of June, we declare the position of Deputy Mayor vacant and we undertake a vote for a Deputy Mayor at that time.
Is there a mover for the officer's recommendation on page 55? Move Councillor Chapman. Is there a seconder? Or? Can
I just ask a question in relation to that, because I may have to seek an amendment. In relation to point 2, should it not be acknowledged that a Deputy Mayor, because if by using the word another Deputy Mayor, for example, if it was my intention to maintain the current Deputy Mayor, by saying another would mean that it would preclude him from standing again.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think there was any intention to preclude Councillor Everard standing again as Deputy Mayor. That's just a typo, so we can change the word another to a. I don't think that, whilst the literal meaning the literal interpretation could be interpreted that way. It's certainly not the intent of the officer's recommendation.
Is there, Councillor Chapman, that's what you're moving? Yep. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Truscott? Are there any speakers to this? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.2, Community Groups Concession Policy. And Councillors Sanderson and Everard are leaving the room. This is page 58. We should have in front of us I'll put that back behind me, an amended recommendation. Thanks. So if you combine 10. Yes. So recommendation 1 to be slightly amended from the officer's recommendation. By deleting but do not exceed 12 game machines on the premises. So is there a mover for the officer's recommendation with that amendment? Councillor Taylor, you're moving that? Yes. Is there a seconder? Councillor Maddern. Did you wish to speak to this, Councillor Taylor?
I believe this is a good policy that is through consultation with community and consideration of community needs, addresses the increasing cost that community groups and not-for-profit groups have to deal with. I think removing the term about but do not exceed 12 gaming machines on the premises is important, because I'm not sure whether that's necessarily a consideration that this council should necessarily give. So I'm happy with the recommendation with that amendment.
Councillor Maddern, a seconder, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, just as a matter of clarity too, it's to point out to the general community that this is a tidying up of an existing policy that we've had. So we don't want someone to think that we haven't had it in the past. We have. It's just a tidy up of some issues around it.
I'll speak really briefly to it. I think this is a really important policy for us to work with different community groups, whether it's a football club or a not-for-profit organisation. We need to help where we can. In terms of that slight amendment to the pokies, I'm vehemently opposed to pokies, but I don't think they should come into this policy. I don't think it's the right vehicle for us to be making any consideration of pokies. So I'm very supportive of this policy. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. 8-0. We'll wait till they're in. The next item is item 10.2.3, the water and wastewater review recommendations on page 65 to 68. And again, we're considering a slight change to the officer's recommendation to 1.1. Oh, yeah, on the recommendation, yeah. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Maddern? Do you want to read it? I'll get you to read out what you're moving. Is there a seconder?
Okay.
Councillor Chapman. Okay, move Councillor Maddern, and you'll just read out the amended. Yeah.
The amended recommendation is that Council endorses for inclusion in the 1920 budget the proposed water and wastewater charge structure for 2019-20 as per attachment 1, subject to the adoption of a limitation on increases to water and wastewater charges to support ratepayers to manage the transition to the new charging methodology.
And do you want to speak to it?
Yes, Mr Mayor. This is probably the final stage of the community consultation that we had around rating. So some of the recommendations from that group have already been implemented. This is the last stage. It was the most probably most contentious and most difficult one. It's one about cost recovery, which is a requirement under the Act. And we're acknowledging here that there were some anomalies in the way that these charges had been issued in the past, in that there were some ups and downs. And so the last part of that recommendation is to acknowledge that there may be some transitional changes, and we're acknowledging that that can have some kind of financial impact. So we're doing our very best to ameliorate that and make a transition path for those businesses that may be impacted. Also recognising that there needs to be fairness and equity in this charging process, and there is a requirement for us under the Act to have cost recovery.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Just in relation to page 68, specifically relating to marina berths, and we talk about cost recovery. Could I, through the chair to the CEO, seek clarity as to how a marina berth is calculated at the same rate as a hotel, a backpacker accommodation, caravan parks and caravan parks, hotels and backpacker accommodation, at $459 per 7 berths, when you consider that, and was consideration given in relation to that most marina berths are occupied by people who would either have a dwelling and they would frequent the boat much less than somebody who is potentially using a hotel. If it is cost recovery, why is it that these two prices are the same?
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for your question, Councillor Taylor. This method of applying the wastewater charges is merely an approximation of the cost. These are, I won't use the word arbitrary, but they are estimates of the likely load on the system from those structures. Each and every one of them, there is not a scientific approach to determining these numbers. They are looked at based on the broad span of combinations of units and facilities in the area, and these prices that are determined from that are an approximation. We adopt principally a postage stamp approach to pricing our water and wastewater products, so it is not a cost recovery on a per premises or per site basis, because as you could imagine, with the broad expanses of our region, there are quite long distances and different types of infrastructure in place to support the delivery of these services to different areas. So to summarise that, for simplicity in the application and the calculation of these, the modification has been used to use the same number of rooms, berths, units or cabins, and through the analysis and the discussion with our rating reference group, these numbers were deemed to be a reasonable approximation for each of those facilities.
So if I could take your point on that, if it's not a scientific approach, my own observations is when I go to, for example, our marina, you would see very few people who actually reside on their boats, and when people use their boats, they normally use them and take them off the marina, and they would often only visit their boat once or twice a week. Does it seem fair, or let me make a comment rather than ask a question? It doesn't seem fair to me to provide the same cost to a hotel room that's being used every day and a boat that is infrequently used on average.
I acknowledge your statement there, Councillor. Was it a question?
Well, I just wonder, is that something you would disagree with, or is there rationale? Does my comment?
I would agree that there would be numerous examples within each of these categories where they could present a reasonable argument that their load on the system differed to that of similar or neighbouring properties with receiving similar fees and charges. again, the nature of the postage stamp approach to pricing in general. We've used the number of berths or units or cabins to derive an allocation of that charge to those properties, and that's principally the basis. So it's really not a direct correlation to the facility and the actual use of the system.
Yes, Mr Mayor, through to the council. I can understand the methodology here that you've actually used with the 7 sites, the 7 rooms, the 7 beds. It's like a hotel. A hotel may only use 1 room, but what we've got to look at here is we've got to look at our assets too. We've got to recover money to look at upgrading our assets and moving forward with in our region. And the methodology I can see that the council here is used is to me is quite good. So, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I think the correct analogy is that a marina is more like a parking lot than it is like a motel. The Boat Club Marina, for instance, has, I don't know, at a guess, 100 berths. There might be at any stage 2 or 3 people living on their boats, but the bulk of the people have simply left their boats there and they use them once a fortnight, once a month or whatever, and they might visit them slightly more often. If a motel or a hotel had 100 rooms and it had a rate of usage comparable to that, that is, that it only had 1 or 2 rooms filled every night, then obviously it wouldn't be in business very long. Now, I appreciate what the director said, and that it's, there's no precise arithmetic way of solving this problem, and I'm not going to vote against this proposal just because of that problem. But I think it is a matter that does need to be looked at again, and there will be probably other matters in there that need to be looked at. So I think it would be a mistake to consider that this is, the final version, that we can all close the book and say, that's resolved perfectly. It's a good deal from perfect, and that's perhaps one of the more obvious examples. I note, for instance, that under the wastewater, the charge for marinas is per pedestal, and that makes sense because I think the Boat Club Marina has about 4 or 6 pedestals for 100 berths. Obviously, to use the analogy, that's closer to a car park than it is to a motel. But the water consumption is the same as motels, hotels, caravan parks and so on. And that's, in my view, not a realistic reflection of it. Thanks.
No, I'm speaking for an amendment that there be an amendment to it that let the motion stand, but the amendment would be that that marina berths be reconsidered and brought back to council. Yeah. Sorry? In the next year's budget negotiations. So, can we get an idea on timing then for this? Like how long, how?
My next council meeting will distribute the budget.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I would be in a position to provide to councillors some modelling on an amendment to that particular item, but I'd ask that we'd have to, I guess, limit any consideration to that one particular item if we are to sort of open up remodelling all of the work, given the presentations and the analysis that we have done. I think that would both be onerous for staff and...
This would be the only thing that I'd ask to be considered, and I think it's based on good rationale.
So perhaps a suggested amendment to the recommendation would be that through the Chief Executive Officer, with the adopted recommendation, would be asked to review the basis of allocation of the water access charge. For marina berths.
For marina berths, yep.
Yep.
What would the time frame of that be?
I could have their finance staff prepare some modelling with that. There's not a lot of marinas there clearly, so we could produce some alternative numbers for that and circulate that next week.
And then that would be available in time for budget adoption.
And that would be available on time. There's not a large number of properties affected.
Does the mover and seconder understand the proposed amendments?
The CEO reviewed the basis of the water access charges for marina berths.
Is that acceptable to the mover?
Yeah.
And the seconder?
So I'd move that.
You're moving that is the amendment.
To include the words. So I'd be moving that the motion includes the words or point 2, that the CEO review the basis of the water access charges for marina berths.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Sanderson seconding that. Do you wish to speak to your proposed amendment?
I think I have.
Do you imagine?
Yeah, actually, I probably am happy to speak to that too. And I have already flagged that this was a very, very difficult process with the committee to try and come up with some answers. And there was a lot of modelling done to try and come up with something that was fair and equitable, but acknowledging that it is not perfect, probably never will be. And I'm happy for a review to be undertaken in something that has been flagged like this, given the complexities of the situation that reference group was going to come up with an answer that was fair and equitable all the way through. We knew we were never going to get it exactly right.
Is there a speaker against the amendment? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak against this motion. There has to be methodology on how you do something. And we're saying it the same with caravan parks and same with marinas. Now, what's to say that someone down at the marina wants to wash their boat down, and this is for water charges. And you could find that people could go down to the marina and use the water to wash their whole boat down. But how many people do you see in caravan parks washing their caravans down? Because the water in a marina goes back into the ocean, it's not seen. But in a caravan park, you can't flood out a caravan park, as I feel. There has to be methodology, and I don't know how you're going to actually work it any different than looking at caravan parks and looking at hotel rooms. And the other thing is if we don't take the money from these couple of facilities that we've got here, the money has to come somewhere in a business. When you're running a business, you've got to look at where you get the money from. So we're looking at $459 for 7 sites. There's not all that money when you break it down over 7 boats. So I will be voting against this, and I think that the officers, we're so close to the budget, and the work that's gone into working out water and the water costs, do they want to throw a meter down there and put a meter rate on it? That's the clear way of doing it, but the water rate would probably be a lot higher than what's actually that's here now. So this is a methodology. This is just as a way of getting a figure that makes the budget work. But I can't see if you lower the cost here, you're going to have to pick it up somewhere within your budget.
Is there a speaker in favour of the amendment? Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't repeat what I've said, but the rate, the new proposed rate is $470.40 per 5 berths. So that if you had a, that's the current one. It's the right-hand column that's saying the proposed charge is $470.40 per 5 berths and also per 5 rooms and so on. Now, that means that for a marina with 100 berths, they would pay, and remember this is an access charge, it's not the consumption charge, it's the access charge. They would pay $9,408 for access in circumstances where there'll be 2 or 3 of those 100 berths with a permanent occupant and maybe another 2 or 3 with a casual occupant who's come in who's come in for a week or so. Now, it seems to me that if you compare that with a motel that has 100 rooms, that is, that they would also be paying $9,408. It's pretty clear that the demand which the motel is making on the service is grossly disproportionate to the demand which the marina is making on the service, and that's why I'm supporting the amendment. And if there are issues such as the impact on other ratepayers, that, well, indeed, that's the point of the amendment, to allow a review, and that's the sort of information which will come back to council. So certainly, you know, the issues that Councillor Chapman raises can be considered as part of that review, and I'm happy to take him for a stroll through the marina and we'll have a look at it. Thank you.
Is there any speaker against the amendment? No further speakers? If not, I'll put the amendment moved by Councillor Taylor and Sanderson. So this is voting to amend the motion to include a review by the CEO, which would be done in time to be considered as part of the budget somehow. Yep. Okay. All in favour of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 3. That's carried 7-3. So the movers and seconders of the motion are now Councillor Taylor and Sanderson. Are there any further speakers? No further speakers on the now amended motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.4, the Auditor General's Interim Observation Report. This is pages 69 to 80. The recommendation is on page 69. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Madden, and seconded Councillor Everard. Did you wish to speak to it?
Yes, this is noting an interim report of the Auditor General. A note that there have been some significant improvements in Auditor General's report over the last few years. There's lots of green, which is really, really good, and I commend the officers for their cooperation in moving our financial systems and other systems forward to meet the legislated requirements. Thank you.
Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.5 at page 81, the Organisational Performance Report. So the recommendation that it be received is on page 81. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Madden, seconded Councillor O'Keefe. Did you wish to speak to? Were there any speakers or questions? No. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.6, councillor meeting attendance for June 2019 at page 96. As you'll see, mandatory attendance are the 4 councillor briefings over the month. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Chapman, seconded Councillor Hanson. Any speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.7 at page 99, attendance at the National General Assembly of Local Government. So, Is there anybody who's interested in going to a conference in Canberra in June? Yeah, yep. So,
Not me. I'm happy to move the motion.
yeah, move, yeah. You'll be
that
moving, yeah.
whoever wants to go goes.
So I think in the past we've sent up to 3 in any one year, sometimes 2, sometimes 1. Councillor Hanson's interested in attending. Is there anyone else that's interested in attending? Yeah. Okay, we can, yeah. Is there any other people interested? No. Okay. Councillor Madden, how did you wish to move? Did you?
I'm happy to move that council approve 3 councillors to be nominated or to volunteer to go to that conference as representatives of council.
Is there a seconder for that? Sorry. Sorry?
If there are 4 councillors who wish to go, I'd be more than happy to do that.
I don't think that's terribly good. Given we only have one who's saying he wants to go, perhaps it's better to.
I prefer, like we do every year, is nominate 2 people and have it resolved here.
Yeah. Okay, we can move on to the next one and ascertain if Councillor Light wishes to attend. We'll move on. No. Okay, I'll come back to this one. Are you contacting him, Stuart? Thanks. The next item is 10.2.8, complaints against the Chief Executive Officer. Page 110.
Mr. Mayor, before we go back, before we move on to that, can I just ask a question on the nominations? So if we nominate somebody to go to the National Assembly, and for whatever reason they are unavailable or ill or something comes up, because we've actually named them at a council meeting, does that mean someone else cannot then step into that role and move forward? And I'd hate to see someone who at this point in time thinks they can't go and then finds out closer to the event that they can and they would really like to go. I'd hate to see them miss that opportunity. So while I take Councillor Taylor's point, I'm a bit concerned about the flexibility of that.
Yeah, and in my 6 years here, 7 years, I don't think we've ever specifically nominated somebody, whether it's the LGAQ or ALCA before. Have we? I'd actually in a resolution. Okay.
Because I've been in that resolution before. So.
Okay.
But if you're going to nominate, I think you should nominate 2, no more.
Okay.
Because no one else wants to do it.
Up to 2 councillors or up to 3.
Well, the motion has been put. It hasn't received a second, so it's lapsed.
So David, how many? 2? Was 3, yeah.
So we haven't moved on to the next item, so it hasn't lapsed.
So Mr. Mayor, we would adjust that recommendation to...
So the recommendation would read, Mr. Page? So as I understand it, the motion that's been put is the council approve the attendance of up to 3 councillors as representative of the council at the 2019 National General Assembly of Local Government to be held 16th and 19th of June 2019 in Canberra.
Given that we only have a maximum of 2, why would you move 3?
I'm happy to speak to that because I think there's a lot of benefit in having our councillors go down there, and it's not just about the voting, it's about the professional development, and it's also about bringing the findings back to our other council members.
Okay, so you're speaking to the motion now?
Yeah, and I'd like to speak further to this motion. I was terribly disappointed to look at today's Chronicle and to see that this is a junket. And that frustrates me terribly because as professionals we're expected to achieve a professional standard in any of the professional organisations out there. As a valuer, as a lawyer, as a doctor, teacher, we're all expected to do professional development. The community expects that we do that. and to bag the cost of it as well. I mean, I paid $2,500 a year 10 years ago for my professional development. That did not include travel or accommodation. We live in regional Queensland. Canberra is the centre of Australia, and every other local authority other than Canberra is going to have travelling costs. And the costs are expensive, yes. The benefits far outweigh the costs. Not further than that, it's not just professional development, it's also an opportunity to put to other levels of government issues that impact local government, and that means our ratepayers. So to see something like that on the front of the paper this morning, I thought was terribly disappointing. It totally misses the point. Yes, there are some keynote speakers, they're probably interesting speakers. Would we normally just spend that much money to go to Canberra to listen to those speakers? No. It is about the event, it is about the learnings, and it's about our council representatives coming back to our council and telling us what's happening on the national level and the outcomes of that particular conference. So, having had my little spiel, yes, someone else might like to have a say.
Thank you. Well, I'll move an amendment that it be 2.
That there be 2?
Yeah, so there's been a move and a seconder, and I'll move that we approve 2 representatives. Is there a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Chapman's seconding that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I would have been happy to adjust the motion to 2 if that's what...
Okay, is that agreeable to you?
Yeah, it's agreeable to me. I'm not going to...
Is that agreeable to the seconder?
Is it agreeable to you, David? At 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not... Okay, so I'll explain. Given that we only have a maximum of 2 people who have indicated they want to attend, and if people otherwise did want to attend, not as the representative, they could use their training budget. So it's not like they would be prevented from attending anyway if somebody did decide later. But at the moment, we actually only have one person one councillor who's indicated they wanted to go. So I feel the motion should reflect that a bit more, given that anybody could go if they wanted to use their training fund. Did you wish to speak?
Yeah, so that's what I looked at too. There's one councillor here that said that they want to go, and then there's another councillor that may be wanting to go. So that's a maximum of 2, and everyone's here. So I'd rather leave it at 2 because that's what it is. But I'd also like to say that I agree with Councillor Madden of what was in the paper today. I've actually been to one of these conferences down in Canberra, and the benefit to go to it, you bond with people, you learn what other communities are doing, you can talk about issues that you've got here, that other communities, with other councillors, and I brought a wealth of knowledge back from that convention, and I just think that it's really great learning curve for people to go along, and what I read or heard on the paper this morning, I just think that was just to try and have a go at us. But I think that for the amount of money it's worth, it's well worth spending and having representation there. It's better than not just turning your back on something like that.
Thank you. Are there any speakers against the amendment? Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thanks. Look, I understand why the amendment's been moved, but nonetheless I see no harm in our expanding the resolution to provide that if 3 want to go, 3 may go. That's a reasonable delegation for a conference as important as this. I'm also conscious of the fact that some councillors may be temporarily intimidated by the publicity in the News Limited paper this morning. And I don't think that's the sort of thing that we ought simply to allow. I think we need to make it quite clear that, as speakers on all sides of this particular debate have indicated, that this is an important conference with considerable benefit to the council and the community. Apart from anything else, apart from all of the things which both Councillor Madden and Councillor Chapman have said, I think it's very important that we not fall into the trap of becoming an insular council. We want people who have expanded their horizons, who have expanded their knowledge base, and who have seen where things are done best and can bring that information back for the benefit of our community. If 3 people want to go, I think that's fine, because we'll get the views of 3 councillors. We'll get the experience of 3 councillors rather than 2, and that's simply why I understand that it may only be 1 or 2 who can go. The resolution the motion as originally put forward, simply allows for 3 if that turns out to be the number that indicate their availability and willingness. Thanks.
Are there any further speakers on the amendment? If not, I'll put the amendment. So this is to amend the motion. All in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 1, 2, 3. The amendment's carried 7-3. So now that's... Yeah, he voted against. So that's carried 7-3. So that the motion before us now is moved by myself, seconded Councillor Chapman, that we send 2 representatives to the conference. I'll speak to this first. It is a good conference. It's an opportunity to meet with councils from Adelaide, from West Australia, from Tasmania, from all over. It's an opportunity to learn. It's from different really good speakers. And so I think it's appropriate that we send representatives. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion as amended, that we send 2 representatives to the National General Assembly. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item, going back to 10.2.8, complaints against the Chief Executive Officer on page 110. So there's the recommendation on page 110 of adopting the policies. Moved by Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Did you wish to speak to this?
Not sure I should. Mr. CEO, just a bit of background for this. This is part of the requirements of the state, and it's nothing personal against the CEO. I just sort of put that out there for the community. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any further speakers or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is 10.2.9. Councillor Taylor's leaving the room on this one. The lease for Football Harvey Bay. So the recommendation is there on page 128. Is there a mover for this? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Truscott. Did you wish to speak to this, Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this is just a machinery matter that's consistent with the decisions which the council has taken over a number of years now to advance the opportunities for sporting organisations at the sports precinct. I understand that that's being well utilised by those organisations which have moved their operations there, and this is part of the normal and rational way of dealing with tenure, and it will allow the organisations to do their own fundraising, to do their own improvements to those facilities. So I recommend it. Thank you.
And there's just a small typo with it. The final line of the recommendation, which should say Football Queensland Wide Bay instead of Football Queensland. Yeah. So it was Football Queensland Wide Bay that was going to have the lease. Now it's Football Harvey Bay.
Yes, obviously I'm happy to incorporate that amendment in the resolution.
Yep. Are there any further speakers on this motion?
Can I just ask a question? So, Mr. Mayor, this will come back to the council for us to finalise?
No, the actual resolution is the council delegates authority to the CEO to complete negotiation, just as any most leases. Well, I've never seen a lease document come to me. No.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is because I queried the officers whether I had the necessary delegated authority to execute this, and I was told that I do, and I believe that I do, and it's consistent with previous decisions of council. The council has reviewed the original lease, and any negotiations in relation to that the lease with Football Queensland Harvey Bay, or Football Harvey Bay, OzTag, and the Netball Association will be generally consistent with the lease that was provided to council.
And will it be consistent with other leases that are out, like such as rates and everything like that?
I'm not proposing that there be any changes to the rates related to these particular leases.
Any further speakers or questions? If not, I'll put the motion moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded Councillor Truscott. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 8-1. Right, we'll move on to item 10.2.10. Proposed lease, Maryborough Military Aviation Museum, page 130. Sorry, Councillor Chapman, seconded Councillor Truscott. The recommendation, page 130. Did you wish to speak to this? No.
They're a good group.
Oh, no. You right? Okay, if not.
Well, I can.
Yeah.
I just think that this is something all we're really doing here is changing the footprint of what they first come for us to approve, and from 4,500 to 5,400. We've already seen the proposal, what they're looking at, and this is just to finalise that change. Thank you.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Yeah, Councillor Madden? Okay, yeah. Okay, item 10.3.1, landscaping screening works. So you got that. Landscape screening works, Drury Lane Development, page 132. There's the officer's recommendation on page 132. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor Chapman. Yeah, Councillor Lewis, you wish to speak to this?
No, just a question when it's convenient. In relation to that development, I noticed that there's a large fence being constructed between that lake or retention basin and the Bialba Burham Heads Road. I assume that's a but just my question is that a state government construction as part of their redevelopment of the road in that area? I note that it may well be that the assessment was made that for traffic noise purposes that was valuable, but it does rather spoil the view of people travelling out on that road.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll have to check on the exact reasons why it went in. I am aware that particularly the Drury Lane entrance, where there'd been significant disagreement between the state and the landowners for significant time, that in the last month they finally reached agreement on the treatment for that intersection and the contributions. So that land is finally going to be opened up. So I suspect it's part of that agreement that the developer and the state government have finally made in terms of getting that intersection constructed. But I'll check the fence and make sure.
Yeah, because I was going to ask when we can expect people to be able to use that land. Do you know?
Through the mayor, that fencing that was placed there, that was actually part of my road's work when they upgraded the intersection, and that's basically matching what was there before, prior to the intersection went up there. So they just basically reinstated. There was a fence there, a timber paling fence, prior to the construction.
And when will the actual street be? When can like Wide Bay Transit or anybody use that road? When are we expecting the intersection to be open? Drury's Lane.
That's still negotiations happening with the state government, so there hasn't been an outcome. My understanding is DTR is looking for signalizing the intersection, so there's still negotiations.
All right, any further speakers or questions? Yeah, Councillor Chapman.
Mr. Mayor, that's actually in my division, and the opposite side of the road there, there was a lot of complaints about noise, and they actually built a sound barrier fence along where those premises are, and I wonder if they've used that high fence for the same thing, so they're not putting noise, because that is a very busy road, onto those houses over on that other side of the lake. So I'd say, to me, that's why I reckon they built that fence. I know there was complaints on the other side, and they went to Main Roads, and Main Roads actually built like a barrier fence for them along there.
If there are no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.3.2, Fraser Coast Tourism Events, New Funding and Accountability Agreement, on page 153. Yeah, and the recommendation is page 154. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Chapman. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mattern. Did you wish to speak to it? Were there any questions? No? If there are no speakers, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. On page 195, item 11.1, Anzac Park walking track lighting. This is Councillor Trust. Is there a seconder for this? This is obviously moved by Councillor Truscott. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sanderson, do you wish to speak to this?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Do I need to read the motion? No? Yeah, I think this is a great walking track around Anzac Park, and particularly with the upgrade that we've had around it of the old footpath being replaced, the new footpath there is fantastic. I know that Councillor Sanderson and myself regularly get asked about lighting options around there, so people can continue to use it for exercise and that as it gets, especially coming into the winter months, where people want to continue to exercise, but it's getting darker so much earlier. And also just for general safety. I think there has been options in the past where we've looked at things like solar lighting, but they've not always been great opportunities because of the trees, which are great as well. So this motion is asking for the CEO to investigate options and provide a report on possibilities of how we might be able to actually make that a reality there, to light the walking track.
Seconder, do you wish to speak? Councillor Sanderson?
Yes, briefly, Mr. Mayor. As said, I concur with this motion. I think, as said, we have been approached over the years, and I think being able to look at a report moving forward actually puts options in front of council. And as said, this is a community park that is heavily used by the community across the whole region. So looking at options into the future, I think, is great, not just for council to look at, but also the community to see if there is options moving forward. Yes, it's a council decision down the track, but I think a report is fantastic and a good step forward.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Mattern.
Yeah, I'd just like to make, I guess in part of this motion is just ask the Chief Executive if this motion is approved in consideration of that lighting, acknowledging that the terrible tragedy at that one point on Anzac Park, on that walking area, and increasing lighting around that particular area. The sinkhole. No, it's not changing the motion, just asking the CEO if, as part of that motion, would he be able to consider that particular issue?
Yes. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next item, 11.2, Fraser Coast Animal Management on page 196, moved by Councillor Truscott. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sanderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this one, there's been quite a lot of talk about recently, and particularly regarding the Maryborough District Animal Refuge. We've had several discussions with the director and greatly appreciate those discussions, and in the process of even further ongoing meetings, with the groups associated, and there's a number of things that we want to look at, and I think that this will address a number of the concerns and help us in order to be able to move forward and find good solutions that are acceptable for council and the refuge and other animal associated groups, and that should work with the community. There is also the other outstanding motion, which I believe is coming back to, I think, next month's meeting, I think it said, just off the top of my head, about after hours animal management, and I think that sort of stuff will get, I imagine, incorporated into this as well. So yes, yeah, and as we're aware, that will have some good flow-on effects. So yeah, I think this will really just identify a lot of ways in a report that we're able to move forward progressively with this.
Are there any further speakers or questions? Put the motion. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 11.3, welcome signage, page 197. Although I understand Councillor Sanderson is moving an amended version of this. Is that right? Do you want to read out the amended version before we see if there's a seconder?
So it's that the Chief Executive Officer be directed to provide a report on the use of banners and other signage to promote celebrations, events, activities and positive community messages within the Fraser Coast, and to present a more welcoming face for visitors to our region.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lewis, do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Sanderson?
Yeah, I'll be brief, Mr. Mayor. The reason I've put this motion forward is I believe going into any city it's important to have welcome messages, and I think it's important to actively promote what's happening, or even positive messages if they're themed or those types of things to any community. It's not asking for absolutely every street to be signed or those types of things, but looking at a report, I think, will help council look at options moving forward, even if it's one street per city or those types of things. I think that's healthy. Examples are Gold Coast do it well, Brisbane do it very well, even Bundaberg, our fellow neighbours do it well. If it's an event coming up or positive messages, I think it's good for any community and visitor, whether visiting that city, to come in. It gives them already, I believe, a pride and a connection to that community. So I would like to look at options moving forward, and I ask that my colleagues support just looking at a report moving forward.
Councillor Lewis is seconder. Do you wish to speak?
Just want to say that I do think there are some opportunities which we perhaps haven't exploited to do the sorts of things that Councillor Sanderson's raised. Obviously they'll come at a cost, and that's why we need to report on it. But yes, that there are. I go to the Gold Coast on a reasonably regular basis, and I see increasingly signs advertising events on the Gold Coast Highway and so on. It may well be that we can get more tourists into our small areas, into our cities and so on, if we tell them about all the great things that are happening. Thank you.
Are there any questions or speakers? Councillor Taylor?
I am going to speak against the motion, and it's simply because in 2012, one of the first things we removed from the budget was the banners because of how expensive they were. With Urban Energy and the cost of erecting them onto those signs, if it was one of the first things that we did in a budget that many years ago, I don't need a report to tell me that it's expensive, and I think there's other ways other than banners to get our message out there through a range of different mediums, and I'm not sure banners are the most appropriate, so I don't actually support the use of banners, so I'll be voting against it.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, what Councillor Sanderson's asking for is a report here, and I'd like to see in this report is something like what Toowoomba Council took on and looked at electronic signing. Now, electronic signing is you can run promotions and videos on that, but also what they've done to cover the cost is they've opened it up for advertisement for businesses that can actually advertise on it also. And the good thing about electronic signing, if there's a disaster or something like that, or a road closure, or you can actually just do that up and put that straight on the sign. So I just hope that in this report we do look at electronic signing, because the way technology is now, that you could actually do the data up with the media room in the office and beam it straight to the sign. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are already doing that with the electronic signs we've got. Welcome messages when there's events. We've been doing it for 4 years. But Mr. CEO, what would the requirements be around main roads with what messages we can put up on that? Like, I'm just a bit confused. Will there be a conflict if we're making them too busy, the signs, I guess?
That's probably a question that would get answered as part of the report, and I think but I'll ask the Director of Development Community to respond to that because he has some more relevant knowledge.
Yeah, thank you, CEO. Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. The answer really depends on where you put them. So I do have some experience with the big, massive electronic signs. I worked on a project to install a couple in another town, and we deliberately went through a process of finding the highest profile sites that weren't on main roads, due to the fact that the requirements around main roads can be quite onerous. But the reality is we do have lots of our own roads where you can find locations that you can do that. So it really is depending on how close you have it to the intersection. If you're within 200 metres of a main roads controlled intersection, the requirements are much higher than if you're beyond the 200 metres. And then you obviously have councils' intersections as well. Sometimes it's counter to what you would expect, but sometimes the easiest place to get main roads approval is in the busiest or most congested intersections where there's already lots of distraction. Because it creates a lower speed environment and people are used to being distracted in those areas. So it's actually sometimes quite difficult to get approvals in rural areas or on roads where there's no other sources of light pollution and the like, because they can be much more distracting than in heavily lit areas. But the reality is we'd have to have a look at what locations, what type of signs. Often you will have to get a traffic management expert to actually do a report to demonstrate that it's safe if you're going for large stuff, particularly where it's near main roads. So the requirements can be quite detailed, but they're quite varied depending on the location and the safety requirements.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, Councillor Madden.
I guess, and I'm surprised at Councillor Lewis not raising this, but Tyro is, I think an ideal place to, if you wanted to promote events on the Fraser Coast, a huge amount of traffic going through, is possibly a place that should be given serious consideration for that kind of signage, however you make it work. We've got one at the front, yeah, but I think there's an opportunity for significantly more than that. I do tend to think sometimes that the banners actually have a different effect to the LEDs. I guess I'm just asking that should be given. If we are doing this report, then maybe that should be given consideration, because I think there's a real opportunity to direct people into Maryborough and Harvey Bay. Unfortunately, Howard is on the Bruce Highway, but no one actually goes through Howard, so it doesn't have quite the same capacity, I think, as Tyro's fairly unique in our Fraser Coast.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would it be possible to seek an amendment on the original motion of Daniel Sanderson's, asking that we consider broader options that may or may not include the use of smart technologies, and that the officers' reports seek to find out the most cost-effective use?
Mr. Mayor, Council can move an amendment as they see, but I see that what you're asking is being part and parcel of a comprehensive report. It doesn't just talk about banners, it talks about signage. That could be digital signage, it could be using the latest technology. I think that's part and parcel, and I think sometimes the motion in front of us is it worthy, should the CEO be directed to develop a report? I think sometimes we slip into start evaluating what that report might mean, well, the outcomes of that report rather than the resolution that's before the council.
Okay, are there any further speakers? I'll put the motion then, moved by Councillor Sanderson, seconded Councillor Lewis. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried 9-1. The next item is item 11.4 on page 198, parking in Maryborough Central Business Precinct. And this is moved by Councillor Sanderson. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Truscott, do you wish to speak to this?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Yep. So, Mr Mayor, the motion speaks for itself. The reason I've brought this forward to council, we've also raised it at a round table meeting in relation to compliance as well. I commend our staff for the work they've done over the years in relation to our parking. As we know as a council, we've gone back and forth over several years to get the right mix. I think we've hit it probably nearly perfectly. This was one more step to, I think, making, not just putting the icing on the cake, but hopefully making everyone in that CBD precinct happy. I know you'll never make everyone happy, but they've raised with us over numerous times, even with Director Carline, we've spoken to businesses, managers of businesses, frustrations where, you know, that they'll get tickets for parking issues. I know that's something that we cannot control, and that's up to those people. But the reason sometimes people are not pinged but given fines is if they're small businesses, sole traders, it is hard for them to, and I'm not giving them sympathy, but get out of their businesses whilst in meetings. If they're in a certain area that could be 2 hours or 4 hours. This virtually gives an option which it says for any CBD precinct employees to park in selected off-street car parks without incurring penalty infringements. So in other words, if we can look at a report where they could go to council and say, well, so I don't keep getting fines. Some have spent over, I believe, $1,000 in fines over the years for a permit to allow them to park somewhere outside the CBD precinct longer than 4 hours if it's longer than that. I know we have 532 all-day car parks, which I think is sufficient, but I think this will just give that one more option for people to seek council support on. So that's the motion I'm putting forward.
Councillor Truscott, as seconder, do you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, parking has been an ongoing issue in the Maryborough CBD for a long time, and I think that hopefully if we can get a report on seeing what possible options there are available, that if we're able to look at something like perhaps opening some car parks in selected off-street car parks, like for example Alan and June Brown car park or the McDowell car park, where people may be able to park, and if they've got a permit or something like that where they can know that their car's going to be there and it's there all day, and have that option available without getting fined, as long as they can prove they're an employee that works in the CBD area. Having previously worked in the CBD years back myself, I know that it was a hassle sometimes if you were in meetings and that, to try and get out and shift your car, but it was one of those things you just had to do. But if there is options available that we can look at, who knows, maybe we're one of the first regions to look at something like this. I think it's good just to be able to look at the options. If it works out, that's terrific. If it doesn't, well, we can say we've explored all options.
I'll just speak to it really quickly. I mean, this sort of troubles me a little. I mean, we normally have, in the past we've had comprehensive reviews of all parking. I remember after the last one, which I didn't terribly agree with, I met with Ergon employees, and so did Councillor Hanson, who lost their all-day parking because you advocated for timed parking for businesses. When you start getting to this situation where you're responding to one after another, like once you take these parking, you'll go, the business people who spoke to you last time, which resulted in us taking away these workers' parking spots, will contact you. I just think it needs to be looked at as you're sort of just chasing rabbits down holes. This was a problem for the Ergon workers, and we made it a problem because of the last decision. I mean, and now to just view it just like, I'm actually in favour of more all-day parking, but it was a council decision to take away all-day parking.
So
And you supported that.
That's exactly
because
right.
business people contacted you.
Exactly
now employees have contacted you. Like, what are you going to do when business people contact you next week?
So I'll respond, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I totally agree. We're not changing all-day car parks. We're giving people an option if they need, in certain off-street car parks, the opportunity, which aren't all day, some are still 2 or 4 hours, they have an opportunity, if they can't get an all-day car park, to have a permit. I don't see anything wrong with that. I agree. I think we should be representing every area of our community, and we're asking the question. I totally agree with our changes today. I think, as I said at the start of putting the motion forward, we have got possibly a very, very... I haven't had issues over the years, but this is something that's been raised with us, and I think if we can look at that, that's okay. If we can't, that's council's decision, but at least I can go back and say I've raised it with these people and with council, which is my duty.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I struggle with it as well. I do well remember what happened back in 2013, I think it was, when we moved it. But I'm happy to have a report come back, but I just wonder about the numbers. Are we talking about 100 employees or 200 employees or 300 employees? It's a lot of people, it's a lot of places that could be potentially tied up all day. I think it's going to potentially open up a can of worms, but look, I'll accept that. I'll vote for the motion, which is only calling for a report and give us options, but I certainly have some reservations.
Councillor Everard, do you have a question?
Yeah, look, I have a question, and that's around the permit system. So, and I would expect, Mr. CEO, that this will come out, and would that be identical? Sorry, Director. Would the permit system, would that be a paid permit? So those people would purchase a permit to park in the CBD all day?
My understanding from what Councillor Sanders said is he's not asking for a free permit, he's asking for a paid permit, but all those things would be considered in a report that comes back to Council.
Yep. Were there any? Councillor Lewis?
Thanks. Yes, I guess the point I was going to make, I obviously wasn't part of the deliberations back in 2013, but I was part of the round table, the conversation about this a few weeks ago. Yes, it was certainly envisaged that one of the things that would be looked at would be a paid permit system, and so employees or small business people or whatever would need to make a decision about whether it was of value to them to buy a permit which would allow them to park in, say, a 4-hour park all day. The idea of it was that might somehow or other assist in cleaning out the kind of pattern where people have their car in a 2-hour thing and then duck out after an hour 55 and shift it somewhere else around the block and keep utilising the short-term parking for effectively the whole of the day. The feeling was that this might get them to move just that extra few hundred metres out of the central CBD area, occupying spaces which perhaps weren't fully occupied, Brown car park, McDowell car park and so on, and thereby freeing up spaces on the doorstep of the various retail and other establishments. That was the thinking behind it. As I say, it is calling just for a report, but certainly the idea of paid permits, which would of itself have a limiting effect, was part of the mix that we thought should be considered.
Councillor Madden?
Yeah, and I guess one of the other areas that does concern me is, while I acknowledge there are all-day parks, some of them are a significant distance from the CBD, and that's not necessarily an issue, except when you're a female in the middle of winter. And because your hours don't finish until 5:30, you're effectively walking to a fairly distant park in circumstances which can be quite intimidating. So I would be seeking in this report to have something of that issue addressed as well, if possible, please.
Are there any further speakers or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The last motion we have in this section is item 16.1.1, which Councillor Light has asked me to move in his absence. This has been distributed as a late item. Is there a second? I'll just say that the first two refer to notes and tables, specific decisions. I've just had a discussion with the CEO, and it's probably more efficient and sufficient to simply note them rather than table them. I'm sure Marlene would prefer that. Yeah. So I'll move it notes, the development application decision, and notes development application decision rather than tabling them both. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Everard. So I'll speak to this quite quickly.
Can I just ask a question first? I understand that a mayor can receive a delegation and a CEO can receive delegation, but it refers to Councillor Light being delegated. Is that the wrong use of the word, or?
I think the council can delegate something to a single councillor. Certainly attend it. Okay. I'm happy to change it to authorise the attendance. Is that right? Yeah. So Shalcott Street, I think most people, it's a street in Tuggham that's been, it's got an older section that's wider, perhaps dating to the 60s, and a newer section which has clearly been subdivided, and the street's much narrower and windier, probably subdivided 15 years ago. A lot of the residents have contacted us over the years with petitions about speeding in the street and also traffic numbers. I went back and found the original documents approving the subdivision, and it actually talks about 30 kilometres per hour on the street. I've driven the street, and it's not safe to drive it over 30. It's a very narrow, windy street, the new section. We've done quite a bit of speed like chicanes when this has been raised before, which I think people who like to speed around actually enjoy. So this is about putting in, going to the committee so the committee can consider a 30 kilometre per hour speed limit in this street. Did you wish to speak to it too? Are there any further speakers or questions? If not, Councillor Taylor. No. Oh no, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? Yeah, that's carried unanimously. Okay, we'll go into general business now. Is there any general business? No, Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, this is a question either to you or to the CEO as appropriate. I just want to draw the Council's attention to an article in this morning's Chronicle headed Regional Deal Talks to Progress Under Morrison Government. And it's, I'll preface my question, if I may, by just reading an extract from the report, which is quoting the member for Hinckley, Mr. Keith Pitt. He says, "I will continue to build on the work I've done for this electorate, the 173 million Hinckley Regional Deal and its the projects including the Hervey Bay CBD development and the Quay Street bypass, the cashless debit card trial, job-creating projects like Bundaberg Brew Drinks, new super brewery, Macadamia's Australia's expansion, and new tourism facility and consolidated linens expansion in Hervey Bay. I urge the Queensland Labor Government to get on board with the Hinckley Regional Deal as soon as possible so we can get these projects underway to benefit the residents of regional Queensland." Now, with that background, my question is I have two questions really. One is that I'm aware that and I was part of the consultation program which was worked out to advance the regional deal. Now, I'm aware that there were a couple of projects approved in the announcement prior to the election period, which weren't part of that consultation and weren't part of Council's resolution. But I wasn't aware then, and indeed I wasn't aware until this morning, that the cashless debit card had ever been considered in the context of the Hinckley deal. And in fact, I think we'd all agreed that the cashless debit card was not a matter that was, well, put it this way, we hadn't agreed because we couldn't make those sorts of agreements, but I don't think anyone sought to bring the cashless debit card issue before council, and it certainly never made a decision on it. Secondly, I wasn't aware that Consolidated Linen's expansion had anything to do with the Hinkler deal. It certainly wasn't mentioned in the matters that were announced publicly. So that's my first question, is to clarify that.
Do you want me to answer that really quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, I haven't read that article, but I didn't. When you read it, I didn't read it that way, that he was including those later projects with the Hinkler deal. I assume there was a comma after Hinkler deal, like the CLS one. That was announced I remember they flew in. So that predated the Hinkler deal. So did the cashless welfare card. So he's talking about the Hinkler deal, comma, Like none of those other ones are included in the Hinkler deal, and which includes the CBD and Key Street. I don't think Bundaberg Brew Drinks is in the Hinkler deal, or certainly CLS isn't, and the cashless welfare card isn't.
The macadamia one was is it Building Better Regions or one of those ones? Yeah. So it wasn't part of the Hinkler deal. It was already announced prior.
Yeah, but they are saying that our airport is part of the Hinkler deal, and that was a BBRC, I think. Yeah, but it was contemporaneous with the regional deal. The other stuff, the cashless welfare card and consolidated linen service, that must have predated the even mention of a regional deal by a year. Or so. Oh, did it? Yeah.
Okay, well that explains it.
I can confirm that the proposed Hinkler deal and the agreement that's been reached between Fraser Coast Regional Council and the federal government does not include the cashless welfare card or the introduction of the cashless welfare card as part of the Hinkler deal, but I would say that it probably was the catalyst to encourage the federal government to invest in the Hinkler region. In relation to some of the other projects or initiatives that have been mentioned, I read that article in the same way that the Mayor read it, that the Hinkler deal of $172 million, and that includes the hospice, the airport, Key Street in Bundaberg, the port conveyor in Bundaberg Port, $40 million for the CBD, Bargara Road, Torbanley, Pyalba Road, Boundary Road, Bruce Highway, and overtaking lanes on the Bruce Highway near Isis, and an unallocated portion of $21.01 million. Now, after the federal government went into caretaker mode, it's not possible for an electoral candidate to quarantine additional funding to the Hinkler deal. And as I said, I read the Consolidated Linen and some of those other projects as examples of funding or initiatives that the federal member was able to bring to the region.
Thanks. That clarifies it. I was just because